Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
We are talking about the stuff of world religions. We're back on our series. We're going to finish it up today with Judaism. But don't worry, for those of you who wanted to talk about other ones, we're going to have another series on cults as well.
Yes.
So if you're into cults and stuff, we got something coming for you.
Yeah. You know, the cult thing is, and we'll talk about this when we do the thing on cults, but it's like super interesting because that word almost means nothing now because people just throw it around so often.
Right.
But there's actually like a definition and signs to look out for if you're part of a cult, you know?
Right.
And so do you know anyone that was ever part of a cult?
With my current understanding, I would classify Jehovah's Witnesses as one.
Okay.
Maybe that's incorrect. So we can correct myself or validate myself in the next series. But if that's the case, I did know I had a friend growing up that was Jehovah's Witness.
Okay. Yeah, I knew we'll have to like really define
what's the classification.
But I knew someone who grew up and his parents grew up in like an actual like cult, like the cults you think about as, you know, that you see on the History Channel and stuff.
Right.
Like, it's very, very interesting. So
well,
we'll get to that series.
There you go. Just buckle up. So before we get on to Judaism today, we're going to start with the life hack of the month. And I got to confess, I had nothing. And so you loaned me a life hack that you received from Laura Beth Harward.
I did, yeah.
I'm 3 degrees removed from this life hack, but I'm both, you were gracious enough to give it to me. So with thanks to Laura Beth, if you have a kid who has a birthday shortly after Halloween, take the candy, collect it up, put it in a piñata for that birthday party. And then all the other kids that come to the party, they can get some of the candy.
Yeah.
Genius mom life hack right there.
It is funny because, you know, I have 3 kids. They came back from Halloween with tons of candy. And I had just as much candy I didn't give away than we got like from trick-or-treating. And it was like, what is the point of this? You know,
right.
Like we have so much candy now.
You got candy. Yeah. Who was it? It was, is it Jim Gaffigan or Brian Regan? One of them that talks about on the highway, watching like log trucks pass each other and be like, wait a minute, you needed logs and you came from over there and they needed logs and came from over there. So why are you passing on the, yeah, it's kind of like that on Halloween.
It's pretty funny.
What's your life hack?
So my life hack is, this is so funny. I've been wearing these shoes more often and I've gotten so many comments about them. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know. Yeah.
So there's these shoes. I got them off Amazon. They're called Zwanglin or something, Zuanglin. But I mean, you could kind of find any brand. But they're basically water shoes that look exactly like tennis shoes. And my friend Casey told me about them because he wears them. And basically he's like, yeah, I hate wearing socks, especially in the summer. And, you know, normally when you wear shoes without socks, your shoes stink real bad. But because these are water shoes, they breathe. You can just put them on without socks and they look cool. They look like any other shoe, but they breathe really well. And you don't have to wear socks. So I've been wearing them more often. My brother has a pair that are the Crocs version, and they look just like tennis shoes, but they're Crocs, but they also are very like, they breathe. And so I'm a big, if you don't know me at all, I'm a huge Croc guy.
You love Crocs.
I love Crocs. And so we can get into that at a later point, how I ended up there, because I used to hate Crocs, but then I put one on and it was amazing.
It's a conversion story.
Yes. No, you're right. Yeah. So,
man,
life hack of the month.
Good life hack. All right, let's get into our last religion we're going to look at in this World Religions series, which is Judaism. And we got to confess from the outlook, this may have been the most difficult one to research.
You know what is so interesting? Because you would think, because as Christians, our historical background is shared with the Jews,
Right.
that it would be kind of easier to research. And that's not the case. This was, I mean, I read so many articles and so many things, and I feel like I'm slightly less confused, but basically just as confused as when we first started. In even the articles that we have been reading, like the Gospel Coalition ones, just really didn't give that much information. It's very interesting.
Right. Not as much as we would have liked. So I guess like a disclaimer here. Number one, we are not talking about Judaism that existed when Jesus walked on earth.
No.
Today, we're going to be talking about modern Judaism, mainly even in America, not even like the Judaism that you may find if you go in Israel.
Right.
So yeah, through our research, we discovered, man, there's just a wide variety here. So
There are. Yeah.
if you're listening to this and you feel like we're wrong, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at info@christfellowshipga.org. But it seems like there's quite a variety going on here. So it's hard to even answer these questions, you know?
It is, because basically, you made a great distinction between the Judaism when Jesus was walking around and now. Yeah, I mean, we have talked about every episode how people give Christians the most flack about having so many denominations.
Right.
But in a sense, like Jews don't have official denominations like Christians do. But I mean, you kind of like, I've read these answers both from articles, but also from answers from Jewish people that were like, yeah, if you ask 10 Jews a question about, salvation, for example, you might get 10 different answers,
And so we're going to try to summarize those 10 different answers, but
yeah,
it may be a bit much. But maybe to begin with, I think it would help people to understand there are basically three broad streams of modern Judaism.
yes.
So what are those?
You have the Orthodox Jews, and this is probably what you would consider more closely to what Jesus, in that time, right? So,
Sure.
Reading the Torah and following the laws kind of to a T. I think for me personally, if you ask me to think about what a Jew is, I would think Orthodox Jew naturally as like a Bible Belt Christian, a Christian who grew up in the Bible Belt.
Sure.
When I think Jewish people, I think Orthodox, but Orthodox might be the least prominent Jewish group in the U.S., which is very interesting as I was researching this.
Yeah, they're gonna follow traditional Jewish laws and rituals. They're gonna observe the Sabbath. Yeah, I mean, when you kind of think Pharisee, it's probably kind of closest to like a Orthodox Jew today.
Yeah, for sure. Then you have what is called the Reform Jews, and that's reform without anything after the M. So it's not reformed. We talk about reformed Christians, but no, these are called Reform Jews. And this is like the liberal arm of Judaism. And this is what is most prominent in the US, and the Jewish people, it's interesting to me because, I read these articles like especially about politics, about how all of these like Jews in New York seem so politically liberal. And that seems like kind of odd to me, but it's because in Reform Judaism, it's like, it's kind of, there's this broad acceptance of everyone and inclusivity and, support LGBT rights and all this stuff. And it was like, oh, okay. I didn't even know Reform Judaism was a thing until today.
Right.
So,
right.
And then there's what is called conservative Judaism, and conservative Judaism kind of splits, the uprights between Orthodox and Reform, right? So more traditional, following more of the laws, but not to the T like Orthodox Jews, but not as, I don't know if inclusive is the right word, but not as inclusive as the Reform Jews. And so you kind of have these three streams of Judaism. Once again, you've been to Israel. I haven't. So
yep.
I would guess maybe in Israel, maybe you have some more Orthodox Jews. but in the US, from what I've read, Reform Judaism is the most common practice form of Judaism. But I'll say this too, and we were just talking about this. I had a ton of Jewish friends in high school, many of them from Israel, and none of them were practicing religious Jews. They were all
Right.
ethnic Jews. But there's this like strong ethnic unity between people from Israel and Jews, but not there's like almost no spiritual unity, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
A
Yep.
very strong ethnic unity though that
Right.
I've seen.
Right.
And I've doubt any of my Jewish friends from high school are listening to this podcast. I saw one of them at a event at East Roswell Park 2 weeks ago.
Oh, nice.
Very much appreciated my friendships with those guys and what I learned from them, and um, heard a lot of cool history about Israel from them. And so, and I just want to say too, this is an interesting thing I've thought about because I don't know exactly what like Kanye West. Have you heard this? What Kanye West and Kyrie Irving have said recently, but a lot of like people have like pulled their connections with Kanye because if he's made these like anti-Semitic comments or
Oh,
whatever.
right. I've heard a little bit about it, but I haven't followed it too closely.
I haven't followed it super closely either, so I'm not going to speak into it because I don't know exactly what he said. But you know what I felt is so interesting? Basically, from the beginning of history, people have like hated Jews. I don't know why. It's
You
so
know,
interesting.
man, so my discipleship group, we just finished going through Esther. We spent about 10 weeks in Esther, and it was fascinating. And you know, you you walk away with this annihilation plot to destroy the Jews, which happened in the Bible in Exodus and in Esther, and then in history at the Holocaust and the I think maybe First Crusade. I don't know, but
Yeah,
yeah, I mean it is pretty staggering when you think about the extent of anti-Semitism that has gone on throughout world history.
it is. And you know, first of all, just throw because this is for the world to hear. Anti-Semitism always wrong. Like,
Yep.
yeah, and especially as a Christian, we don't hate like a people group for their ethnicity or color of skin ever for any reason, right?
Yeah.
Or their beliefs or whatever it is. And so, but the second thing I think is interesting is, we talked about in our eschatology podcast. I will say the nation of Israel, I lean on millennial, but like watching just history unfold with Israel makes premillennialism kind of makes sense,
It'll
right?
it'll make you a dispensational premillennialist. I mean, it is true. The return of the nation state of Israel in 1948, which
after
really
after
only happened
1900 years.
after it only happened because of the Holocaust. I mean, the
Right.
worldwide sympathy of the Jews for the Holocaust. I mean, it's a pretty astounding thing when you read in the Bible about so many of the nations mentioned in the Old Testament, the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Assyrians, the they don't have a country anymore, but Israel has a country. It's pretty astonishing. It makes you, yeah, it gives some good credence to the dispensationalists out there who say that God actually has something very special planned with the nation state of Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like over and over and over again, for whatever reason, so many areas of the world have hated the Jewish people.
Hmm.
Uh, for like I know they would give a reason, but I would say kind of for no reason.
Right.
Uh, but then also just that they have never been as many as I think you use the term like eradication attempts there have been.
Right.
There's that there's just something about them being God's people that they no one's has ever succeeded,
I
and I
mean,
think that says something.
yeah, it's incredible. So
Yeah, I was just like, I remember listening to my friends from high school talk about the 6 Days War and
yeah,
basically how they were just like incredibly overpowered, and these like fighter pilots like went up in the air and just like 1 against 10 essentially, and just
yes,
like decimated the enemies, and it's like
yeah.
you
How do
know
you explain that?
Yeah, how do you explain? I don't know. It's super interesting. Yeah, if you're a history nerd, which I guess both of us are a little bit,
Yeah.
research it. It's fascinating.
I mean, yeah, there are like so many reasons the nation state of Israel should not still exist,
Right.
just like logically, and it continues to surpass expectations. It's incredible. So, um, yeah, interesting thoughts. So we're going to go through our questions, and so we just have to admit on the front end how an Orthodox Jew or a Reformed Jew or a conservative Jew would answer these questions is going to vary pretty widely. So we're going to
Yes.
struggle to kind of answer them. But here we
So
go.
yeah, yeah. Good disclaimer. We're just gonna answer the best we can. And
Yeah.
so, if you are a Jewish person listening to this, we'd love to sit down with you, and you can just tell us everything you know, and we'd love to learn.
Yep.
So
And
just know that we're learning with you guys as our listeners too.
we'll do a follow-up podcast. But first question, what does this religion teach about God?
So yeah, I mean, I would say God is a monotheistic God, right? I would say different than the Trinitarian God that we believe in, because they don't believe, obviously, that Jesus is God. But it is Yahweh, right?
Right.
And I think something interesting that I learned in seminary, this is for both Christians and Jewish people, I guess, but that you have Yahweh, which is the name of God, right? In Exodus, when God says, I am who I am, right? Yahweh. That's like a sacred name. So you see in the Ten Commandments, don't take the Lord's name in vain. Super interesting. I was reading like these posts about on Jewish websites or even on like Quora or these like places where you can answer questions. And even now they write God capital G dash D.
Yep.
And it's because
It's a
sacred name
reverence
of
thing.
God.
Yeah.
It's a reverence thing. Yeah.
Yep.
And so just interesting fact about the name of God is the Jewish people essentially created this word Adonai, which is basically God, but they wanted to change a word because they didn't want to take his name in vain. But then there's also the term Elohim, which is kind of like the title of God, right?
Yep.
And so you have the name of God, Yahweh, you have the title of God, Elohim, and then you have this word Adonai, which is, you know, in replacement of not taking the Lord's name in vain, but it means God, right?
Right.
And so,
which I think is also Jehovah. I think that's also where
yes,
Jehovah came from.
it does.
Is like replacing Yahweh.
The,
It's not something you would write or say in a,
Jehovah is the German translation of Yahweh, right?
Mm.
So if you take like the major consonant letters, what's the Y sound in German? It's J.
Mm-hmm.
So you have YH, WH, however you want to, spell Yahweh.
Right.
Then you have Jehovah, you have J, Hova, H. Then how did Germans say the W sound? V,
yeah.
H, right? So
Yeah, that's interesting.
Jehovah is the German translation of Yahweh. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say like, as we talk about the scripture, the Protestant Old Testament is the same set of books in a different order as the Jewish Bible, right?
Which is called the Tanakh.
The Tanakh, which we'll get to as one of our questions. But it's so I would say in some ways I asked this question to you last time. Do Jewish people and Christians believe in the same God? And we kind of answered like kind of, right?
I was hoping like, I was going to be able to ask that question.
I'm sorry.
You had to answer it. Yeah, I know. I struggle to answer this because Jesus is the image of God, the exact imprint of his nature. And so to reject Jesus, we worship Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the Trinitarian God of the Bible. They do not. And so I struggle to answer it with a yes because they're not worshiping Jesus. And at the same time, Abraham wasn't worshiping a Trinitarian God and his understanding, yet he was worshiping the same God. And so I struggle to answer the question, to be honest with you.
And I think this is part of it, as you read in Paul's letters, as he always mentions like we have been revealed the mysteries, right, of heaven. I think this is one of the mysteries that
absolutely
have been revealed to us as Christians that were not revealed to the ancient Israelites, right? And so
what's hard is you can't judge Abraham on the same standard of knowledge that a modern day Jew has, because the mystery has been revealed in this current era, and he didn't have access to that. So that even deepens my struggle to answer the question, honestly.
Yeah. So the answer is yes and no, and kind of maybe.
Right. You know, I think that's about as clear as mud.
So yeah. So I mean, we would say yes, we believe in Yahweh, right?
Right.
But we would maybe say yes, that is God. That is God. But your view is incomplete. As Christians, we would say that.
Yeah.
Your view is incomplete.
To reject the Son
is to reject
the Father. So there is no rightful way to worship God apart from worshiping his Son Jesus. There is no avenue for that. So, and yet they are worshiping the God of the Old Testament, that the law and the prophets that all bear witness to Jesus. So it's
yeah.
Next question.
And to make it even more confusing, like half of my friends in high school, they were Jewish atheists.
Right. That's a curveball.
Like you can't be like a Christian atheist.
Right.
Because Christianity is not like an ethnic like thing you hold on to, but Judaism is, right?
Yeah.
And so you can be a Jewish atheist. So for many Jews that you may talk to as a listener, they might be an atheist. That's like 100% possible in the US, at least.
Yeah, that's nice and confusing.
Yep.
So there you go. All right. What does this religion teach about sin?
So sin, from what I read, I would say fairly similar concept of sin as us, in terms of God has set a standard, right? Like 10 commandments, whatever it is, the law.
Sure.
And if you break the law, right? And so it was funny. I was reading this article, and I always have this metaphor for sin as missing the mark, like archery. Like if you miss the bullseye,
it's called sin.
And I guess that's a Jewish idea, because
interesting. Okay.
They use the exact same idea, like the exact same metaphor. And I was like, oh, okay. So sin, very similar. A big difference is there's no concept of original sin. They would say you can receive the consequences of your parents' sin, but you don't receive like the sin from your parents. But I would say, as a Christian, we also don't receive our parents' sin, but we all sin because Adam sinned, because sin has entered the world. And I would say, even reading this, the Jewish idea of Christian sin, original sin, is different than my idea of Christian original sin, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
But something that's interesting that I read is that you can't, in Jewish belief, you can't actually sin until you have your bar mitzvah. So the bar mitzvah is really ba and bar mitzvah, depending if you're a guy or girl, is really important, because that's when you come of age and you are now responsible to follow the law.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so
kind
now
of the age of accountability concept, kind of
similar. Yeah, except for the Jewish idea of salvation and heaven and stuff is very different.
Right. We'll get there in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. What does this religion teach about salvation then?
I have to laugh because it just depends. Like, and I feel like, honestly, when I read, if you go type in, what do Jews believe about salvation? And you like look at these answer boards, all of them say it depends. But it's different, because every religion we've talked about so far, besides Christianity, has a lot to do with your own obedience and earning your way to heaven, doing more right things than wrong things. But that's not really Judaism. From what I could tell and what I can gather is that Judaism is what saves you most is that you are an elect person of the people of God.
Hmm.
And like hilariously, as a Christian, I'm using Christian terms inputting into a Jewish belief. So if you're Jewish, don't take this the wrong way. I'm just using terms that are helpful for Christians to understand. It's like almost a Calvinistic view of salvation, like
Sure.
being God's elect people, right? And Jewish people uh, believe in if you are elect people of Israel, um, that's what saves you. And so it's not about like earning your way back to heaven, following the law. It's about like closeness with God. So it's about like repentance and being closer to God. But if you're like elect person of God's people, then you will be, I guess, saved if you want to use the word saved.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hmm. All right. So, what does Judaism teach about scripture?
All right. So this one is a little bit more easier to
Is it a
answer.
little more, yeah, firm?
So they believe it in what is called the Tanakh. And so that's the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Navim and the Ketubim, one which is like, I forgot which one is which. One is like the prophetic writings, and one is like the
Yeah, the Navim are the prophetic writings, and the
okay,
Ketubim are the writings. So, Psalms, Proverbs,
right.
yeah,
Um,
Ecclesiastes.
so just major difference between you know the Protestant Bible and the Jewish Bible. The our Protestant Bible is ordered with the Greek way to order books, right? And so there's like an extra, so there's like 4 categories in our Bible. I mean, if you open your Bible, it won't give you 4 categories, but it's kind of like split up into 4 categories where it's only 3 in the Jewish Old Testament. And that's so the reason is because the Christians initially used what is called the Septuagint. During the Reformation, the reformers decided to go back to the Jewish Old Testament. That's why there's a difference between Protestant Bible and Catholic Bible, but kept the Septuagint, or not the Septuagint, but the Catholic order of the scriptures. Whereas the Jewish order is a little different. And I actually think if you read it as a Christian, the Jewish order makes more sense for Christians to read it because
Mm-hmm.
it ends with Chronicles,
Right.
a genealogy leading up to all the kings, right? And so the difference between the Book of Kings and the Book of Chronicles is that the kings make the kings look really bad, and the Chronicles give hope that the kings were leading to the true King, Jesus.
Right.
As a Christian, we would say that. And it's cool. Chronicles starts and ends, or starts with the genealogy. And how's Matthew start? With the
Genealogy.
genealogy, right? Starts with the genealogy. With Chronicles starts with the genealogy of the kings. Matthew starts with a genealogy of the true king, right? And I think very interesting. But there's also a couple other writings like the Talmud that Jewish people will read too. But a scripture they would say would be the Old Testament, the Tanakh.
And the Talmud would also be having some like interpretation, right,
Yes, yeah, I believe
of
so.
the Tanakh. So there's some of that, kind of how you're reading, and I think there's also like and I was a little unsure on that, but like the Mishnah
Yes,
is like a text that describes and explains the Jewish code of law. And
yes,
the Talmud contains the Mishnah and another text called the Gemara, which examines the Mishnah. So the Mishnah examines the Tanakh, the Gemara examines the Mishnah, and my best understanding of this is it's kind of a collection of rabbis' thoughts on these things. So almost kind of like a running devotional commentary on the faith is kind of my understanding of Mishnah and Talmud, and so that would be a part of the kind of scriptural experience and canon, from
right.
what I understand.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what's interesting too, and this is what makes it, I guess, the confusing part of answering this question is uh there's also like an idea of like the written history, right? The written word of God, and then there's like an oral history too. But
Right.
not all Jews agree on that either. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
like an important distinction though, like, you know, which one's which. So
Just to go back for a second on the um, Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketubim, uh, Jesus alludes to this order in Luke 24, when he says, uh, Luke 24, verse 44, then he said to them, these are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. And so
yeah.
you see that threefold division in that order. That would have been the Bible, so to speak, that Jesus
Yes.
would have been used to,
Yep.
the Tanakh. So speaking of him, what does Judaism teach about Jesus?
Well, that Jesus is not the Messiah and
Right.
Jesus is not the Son of God. And so this idea of Messiah is really interesting as I was reading about it. Once again, depending on which
Who
sect
you
of
ask?
Judaism or whatever. But I was reading this one woman talk about it, and she was just saying the Messiah, there's like all of these categories that the Messiah has to hit, like at least the traditional Jewish understanding of it. And one of them, it was that, you know, the Jewish people thought the Messiah was going to be this like king who overthrew Rome, right? And Jesus was
Sure.
not that. He was the king. He just wasn't the one that was going to overthrow like physically the Roman Empire.
Right.
Uh, but that's like one of, so there's like a bunch of different things that you have to be in order to be the Messiah. And she was saying, you know, I'm one of the cool things about a Jew being a Jew is that the Messiah can reveal himself at any point. You know, it could be the king of a nation or it could be the UPS guy that delivers your thing. You don't know, you know? I just
Interesting.
thought that was super interesting. But the reason, one of the main reasons Jews don't consider Jesus the Messiah is because there was this Jewish belief of, you know, I don't remember how many different things that the Messiah had to be, but they didn't feel like Jesus hit all of those marks.
Hmm.
And then so obviously don't believe in that Jesus is God. And I mean, that's why the Pharisees had took Barabbas down and put him up, right?
Right.
Because Jesus kept saying he was God.
Well,
But they
and it seems like, Christianity would have like uh, an understanding of like a multi-phase fulfillment of a lot of prophecy. It was described by my seminary professors kind of like a mountain range. When you're looking far away, it looks like everything, it's one mountain,
right.
all at the same spot. And then you climb the first mountain, you see it's actually tiered, it's a kind of
Yeah.
multi-tiered. And I think that the concept of Messiah, in when you read the Old Testament prophets, it kind of sounds like everything happens at once, worldwide peace, kind of New Jerusalem, everything sad, untrue. And so, especially in Jesus's day, there was this expectation that the Messiah was going to free us from Rome and usher in this era of, perfection. And that's not what happened with Jesus. So, and I think you also have a variety of still current like Jewish responses to Jesus. Like
Yeah.
some would be pretty positive on like he was like a good rabbi, a good teacher, a good prophet, and then some pretty negative.
Yeah.
That's my understanding. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have a wide range. I mean,
yeah,
that's the kind of the theme of
the
today,
theme
right?
here, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so what about discipleship? What does this religion teach about discipleship? How do you live the Jewish life?
So once again, huge
It
range.
depends.
I think I've read that some Jews have taken a lot from like Eastern idea of mysticism, right? Kind of like we're talking about the universe, all this stuff. Some the like, you know, I read the Reform Judaism, like the US Reform Judaism website, and they were like, heaven's not a a gated community. It's an open door for all people, you know. So it's kind of like, well,
One of those.
so it doesn't really matter what you do, right?
Right.
But then you have kind of the Orthodox Jews, which I think they would. Um, yeah, okay. I'm now remembering in middle school, I did know one girl who their family were Orthodox
Oh,
Jews,
there you
and
go.
they still, for example, on Saturdays on the Sabbath, followed all the rules. Like you can only take a certain amount of steps.
Yep.
Um, you had to like set out the toilet paper or whatever the night before because you can only like rip a certain amount of times a day or something like that.
Yeah.
Like you had to make sure all the lights were turned on before a certain time, and um, you ate the is it called like the Shabbat dinner or something like the dinner?
Yeah, Shabbat. Yeah, Friday night.
Um, and so I would say, what does it mean to be a disciple in that in Judaism is to follow God's law and
Right.
follow it what you would see in the Old Testament, you
Yeah,
know?
and even when you look at the Old Testament, um, the so what the the sign of the Noahic covenant is the rainbow.
Right.
The sign of the Abrahamic covenant is circumcision. The sign of the Mosaic covenant is actually the Sabbath. And if you read the 10 commandments, the longest of the 10 is Sabbath. It's got the greatest amount of detail and really was the identity marker among Jews, coupled with circumcision, which is why when Jesus comes and he starts messing with the party line on how you two are observed Sabbath, it really upset people. But I was fascinated when I went to Israel. They have what's called Shabbat elevators. And
Huh.
on Sabbath, you have to stop on every single floor. It is automatically coded to hit every floor so you don't have to press the button because that would be
Interesting.
considered work. Your alarm clock, your lights are all put on a timer in the hotel room. They just click on at 8 a.m. or whatever. You don't touch anything. It's really fascinating. And so I'd say if you're seeking to live the Jewish life, a big piece of that is Sabbath observance. Then you also have the like importance of the synagogue, which is a Jewish house of prayer, sometimes communal worship as well. And so you would have that as a piece of, especially if you're an Orthodox Jew, engaging in worship that way. I did read one article that talked about the importance of like Torah study. So it was the Yeshiva is the Jewish institution that focuses on Torah study.
Yeah.
And it's done through daily, I'm going to butcher it, Shurim, which are lectures or classes. Um, and so that would be a piece of it too, is Torah studying, Talmud studying, all that.
Yeah. And I think something, as we're throwing out Jewish terms, Hebrew terms, that's important in the discipleship piece is the observance of the Jewish holidays. I do know that this is really important, even if you're not like super religious.
Right.
With celebrating Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hanukkah, those are really, really important.
Just a few, and this is we'll link this. This is from the History Channel website, actually. So, few important feasts. Passover is a holiday that lasts 7 or 8 days, celebrates Jewish freedom from slavery in Egypt. So, Christians are well known with that. Rosh Hashanah is celebrating the birth of the universe and humanity. So, Jewish New Year. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, usually spent fasting and praying. High holy days are the 10 days that start with Rosh Hashanah and end with Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is 10 days after the new year. And then Hanukkah is what most Americans are probably most familiar with because it's closest to Christmas, not because it's the most important holiday. It lasts 8 days. It commemorates the rededication of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem after the Maccabee revolt.
Yeah.
About 2,000 years ago, where God basically miraculously kept the lights on.
Right.
And
Actually, the
then,
story of is it Judah Maccabee is a pretty cool
yeah,
story.
it is a pretty
So
cool story. And if you understand that better, you can understand what people were looking for in a Messiah when Jesus came better. And then Purim is celebrating the Book of Esther, the salvation of the Jews from there. So celebrating those high holy days are important.
Yeah.
And then last question, what does Judaism teach about the afterlife?
Man. Well,
Wouldn't you like
like
to know?
every answer depends. I've anywhere between there's like a more secular view. You die and your body goes into the ground and that's it. To like a closer to Christian view of heaven. I wouldn't say I doubt it's exactly the same, and kind of everything in between, I guess.
Yeah.
So there, I, I, what I've read is there's some Jews who believe in a heaven and a hell. Most Jews don't believe in a hell. Some Jews believe in a heaven. Just depends. And so, even the Jews who do believe in a heaven and a hell, that concept didn't come around until about the 2nd century. And so, but it's interesting reading the Old Testament talking about Sheol, for example.
Yeah.
And that idea is still different than what we would consider hell, right? And
yeah,
so
if you only took the Old Testament, there's not too much there to give a well-informed kind of eschatology on heaven and hell. There really is not a lot there. So,
right.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
interesting.
most of the Old Testament was just like a history of of God's election of the nation of Israel. I mean, that's really what it is, right? Israel's disobedience, God's electing to keep a remnant to himself.
Yeah.
And actually, as a Christian, you would move forward and say, well, that's still kind of what we believe, you know?
Right.
It's just that now Israel is now metaphorically the church, right? And it's the big difference.
Well, if you're a covenant theologian,
I'm sorry, yes.
A dispensationalist just vomited inside of their mouth when you said that. Yeah, so I think that's a good place to end, actually, is Christians have different understandings even of the current ethnic Jewish population.
Yeah.
If you are a dispensationalist, you view the current ethnic Jewish population as very important in God's end time, plan and totally distinct from the church. If you're a covenant theologian, more like Presbyterian, you view the church basically replaced Israel, and the current ethnic Jews really have nothing to do with God's plan for the world.
Yeah.
And then you have kind of people in the middle. So it is just be aware as a Christian, even fellow Christians disagree with each other on the kind of role of ethnic Jews in God's current and end time redemptive purposes.
Right.
Which adds another layer to all this.
Yeah. And just to add one more layer of confusion, but I think it's important because I started by talking about Kanye and Kyrie Irving. I think a lot of these African-American celebrities, a lot of them have, I don't know if a lot is the right word, but some of them have bought into something called the Black Hebrew Israelite. I'm not exactly sure that's what Kanye or Kyrie is, but part of that belief is that they believe that the real nation of Israel is Black people and not the current Jewish people. And that's where a lot of if you see people shouting anti-Semitism from some of these like Black celebrities that are tweeting some of these books and stuff, that's what's going on. Is that there's like the Black Hebrew Israelite idea is that Black people are the real Israel, and then the current Jewish people are like basically stolen their identity, and that's where you get this like push between the Jewish community and the Black community fighting on Twitter. is that's where that comes from. So,
well, there you go for that. So
yeah.
But that's it. That ends our series on world religions and ending it on Judaism. Any final thoughts?
Yeah. I just wanted to, as we talk about how do we as Christians talk to a Jewish person?
Oh, right. Yes.
About Christianity. First of all, once again, doing this series has really like affirmed my faith in Christ. Something I was telling you that's interesting is from a Christian perspective, looking backwards, it really did seem like the the nation of Israel had a solidified belief up until Christ. And then after that, there was nothing to like hold on to spiritually that held them together. And I think that's why there's so many of these broad views. Whereas even amongst all the denominations with Christians, we would agree that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him, right?
Yep.
And that, to me, like, it just seems like, wow, Jesus was kind of like this completion of that whole story. And that's what we believe as Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find that really interesting.
Yeah.
And I would say that's the way I would go about it, is to show Jesus really is the Messiah that Jewish people had been waiting for and now are still waiting for. He's already come.
Yep.
And I know it sounds cheesy, but I've actually convinced a small number of Jewish people when I was at KSU to come to Bible study, because they was like, oh, I can't go to that Christian thing. I'm Jewish. And I was like, well, Jesus was Jewish. And they were like, I guess that makes sense. And they would come. And it was really interesting talking about it. But I would kind of go with the route of showing that Jesus is why Jesus is truly the Messiah.
He's the Messiah. Yeah. I think, start in the Old Testament, talk about the Passover lamb. I think the most compelling passage is Isaiah 53, the suffering servant. And I mean, that's just so written 700 years before Christ. Yet it seems like it was a reporter's description of what happened to Jesus on the cross. So really would recommend giving Isaiah 53 a shot as opportunity arises with Jewish friends.
Yeah,
so
that's a good word.
But thanks for joining us for this series and for this podcast, and we will talk to you soon.